Good afternoon. Today's talk will be on Jane Austen's novel Northanger Abbey. The novel Northanger Abbey is a satire of Gothic novels written by Jane Austen. It was completed for publication sometime in 1803, making it the first of Austen's novels in order of completion, but it was only published posthumously in 1817 with another of her novels, Persuasion. The story revolves around Catherine Morland, the young and naive heroine, and her journey to a better understanding of herself and the world around her. The plot of Northanger Abbey concerns a young girl, Catherine, with the dullest home life of any Austen heroine. One summer, she leaves her village with friends for Bath, where she is introduced to society and love. For the latter, she has an easy choice between the vulgar and boorishly masculine John Thorpe and the skittish, gentlemanly, more androgynous Henry Tilney, although her liking for her new friend, John's sister Isabella, gives her some distrust of her initial instincts, and there are never quite admitted resemblances between the two overbearing suitors. Having at home read mainly in improving literature and poetic extracts, her starved imagination is overwhelmed by the power of Gothic fiction when she encounters Mrs. Radcliffe's world of sensational events, mysterious castles, offhand heroines, and commanding villains. Others in her circle are equally enthralled to fictions, but within real life, under the influence of Thorpe's selfish exaggeration, Henry's father, the imposing general, comes to believe Catherine an heiress. So he invites her to his abbey to secure her for his son. There, her head full of Gothic expectations, she begins to make her own fiction, transforming the modernized house into the site of wife murder and its selfish owner into a literary villain until ejected by him when her wealth proves illusion. By now, she has recovered from her Gothic fears, and although the kindly daughter, Eleanor, melodramatically refers to her as Dravenite of the house, she faces with equanimity a potentially unpleasant journey back home all alone. There, Catherine encounters her old image as a sad little scatterbrained creature, a diminution of the Gothic orphan until elevated to heroine status by the arrival of Henry. The pair achieve perfect happiness at the respective ages of 26 and 18. Romance and realism come together in mutual affectionate mockery. Conduct books and didactic novels indicated the crucial importance of reading in the formation of a girl's mind, and almost everyone saw danger in a promiscuous consumption, as it were, of imaginative fiction, especially with the new consumerist reading habits which encouraged rapidity of progression of plot rather than depth of response. The main fear was primarily sexual and also social. That adult men were consuming pornography provoked less cultural anxiety than the notion of the young middle class virgin learning from romance to expect more from life than she was likely to get. The anxiety, in some form as old as printed fiction, intensified markedly with the growth of domestic romances aimed directly at women. A typical warning voice was that of the conduct book writer and clergyman James Fordyce, admired by the ridiculous Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice. Fordyce writes of swarms of foolish and of worthless novels incessantly spawned by dull and by dissolute scribblers, and with unwearied industry disseminated from our circulating libraries, unquote, destroying virtuous principle and introducing impure ideas, extravagant desires, and notions of happiness, alike fantastic and false. We get to learn in the novel that Catherine Morland has a somewhat haphazard, unplanned upbringing which leaves her unprepared for adult life. Although neither of her parents dies in her youth, like the heroine of another novel of this time, they take a very casual attitude towards their children, the younger engaging their attention at the expense of the elder. Catherine grows up to be first of all something of a tomboy, as it were, then a keen reader without any substantial parental guidance. Austen says that from 15 to 17 she was in training for a heroine. She read all such works as heroines must read to supply their memories with those quotations which are so serviceable and so soothing in the vicissitudes of their eventful lives. Unquote. Catherine meets no one unto whom she can project her romance derived fantasies. She is a much more reticent figure, with the author emphasizing her sheer ordinariness. When she discovers Gothic romances, Catherine is totally entranced. For example, The Mysteries of Udolpho, a novel of 1794, becomes her favorite reading and leaves a very deep impression upon her already overactive imagination. Soon she is viewing the world through the eyes of a Radcliffe heroine, seeing danger, dark plots, and conspiracies everywhere. Invited to the Tilney family home, Northanger Abbey, as a guest, Catherine allows her imagination to run riot, endowing the place with all the characteristics of the setting of a Gothic novel, complete with the air of menace and foreboding that they would have in her favorite authors. On discovering an old chest in her room, for example, we find that Catherine automatically assumes that the chest must hold a mysterious secret, but it turns out to contain only bedclothes. A cabinet then yields up what seems like an old manuscript with several sheets wrapped up in it, but they prove to be nothing more interesting than a laundry list and some insignificant bills. Persisting through such disappointments, Catherine continues to believe there must be some dark secrets in the Tilney house, an attitude which is only strengthened when she hears of the death of Tilney's mother from a sudden illness 9 years earlier. That is enough to suggest foul play to Catherine, especially since Mrs. Tilney's room has been left untouched since the event. In true Gothic fashion, we see that Catherine allows the wildest speculations to form in her mind. The fact that General Tilney is rather a forbidding figure, a petty tyrant somewhat within their own family, only prompts Catherine to push on and think the unthinkable. Eventually, she is brought to her senses by the sharp response Henry Tilney makes to her prying into the topic. On realizing that Kathleen has come to the conclusion that her father was to blame for his mother's death, as would so often be the case in the plot of a Gothic novel, Henry is deeply insulted. He says, and I quote, "If I understand you rightly, you have formed a surmise of such horror as I have hardly words to, dear Miss Morland. Consider the dreadful nature of the suspicions you have entertained. What have you been judging from? Remember the country and the age in which we live. Remember that we are English, that we are Christians. Dearest Miss Morland, what ideas have you been admitting?" Unquote. At the opening sentence of the chapter that follows this episode, we have Austen pithily putting it that the visions of romance were over for Catherine. Henry's shocked reaction projects Catherine into some form of an adulthood, and she is made to realize that her infatuation with Gothic literature is childish and potentially damaging to her prospects in life. Fortunately, things work out well for Catherine, with Henry forgiving her and eventually marrying her, despite some mildly Gothic tyranny on the part of his father in opposing the son's choice in marrying Catherine. But it could so easily have gone horribly wrong, and Catherine has been taught a lesson about the dangers of becoming too embroiled in fictional worlds. These must never be confused with real life, obviously, and it is a critical part of a rite of passage from adolescence to adulthood to come to this realization. Catherine has to learn to read the world around her correctly and to make sober assessments of the people in it. Just as Northanger Abbey is far more ordinary than maybe Castle Udolpho, so life in general is far more ordinary than any fantasy dreamed up by a Gothic author. Charming as were all Mrs. Radcliffe's works, and charming even as were the works of all her imitators, it was not in them perhaps that human nature, at least in the Midland countries of England, was to be looked for, unquote, as the author puts it in her most pointed fashion. Catherine has to be humiliated to experience her fateful epiphany, as it were. But her friend Isabella Thorpe fails to make the same transition from childish behavior into responsible adulthood within the framework of the same narrative and perhaps the same set of conditions. Catherine has soon made a solemn resolution of always judging and acting in future with the greatest good sense. But that is patently beyond Isabella, who continues to act with all the impetuosity of the heroine in a Gothic tale. Suitors, for example, are treated with disdain, with Isabella revealing herself to be emotionally immature and only too likely to enter a bad marriage. No small matter in a society where marriage was almost the entire basis of a woman's identity and existence. A mixture of sentimental claptrap and selfish ambition, as Mary Waldron has damningly described her, Isabella stands as a warning to Catherine of what can happen when one neglects to learn the rules of social conduct. For women especially, reputation was crucial, and by switching her affections from Catherine's brother James to Henry's brother Frederick, Isabella leaves her own reputation badly stained, as it were, drawing the disapproval of the social circles in which she moves. Henry, for one, believes that Isabella is fickle enough to go off with yet another, acidly remarking that Frederick might still escape his entanglement with her if a baronet should come in her way. Isabella is simply not to be trusted, it appears, and by implication, Gothic literature has much to answer for in her case, exacerbating existing character feelings. For those who follow Plato's line on the issue, there is always going to be the fear of what emotionally charged literary material can do to the impressionable. The proper attitude, as it were, to adopt towards literature is the one exhibited by Henry Tilney, who is more than happy to admit to finding enjoyment in reading Gothic romances. And we have a wonderful and illustrative quotation here that will help us to understand the exact nuance of Henry's approach to such romances. He says, "The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid. I have read all Mrs. Radcliffe's works, and most of them with great pleasure. The Mysteries of Udolpho, when I had once begun it, I could not lay down again. I remember finishing it in 2 days, my hair standing on end the whole time." Unquote. Henry goes on to say that he prizes invention above all in his reading, but it is clear that he regards fiction as a form of entertainment and entertainment alone, some form of a pleasant diversion, as it were, from the problems of everyday life, rather than an accurate guide to life itself, as Catherine and Isabella are plainly taking it to be. Neither of the latter seems able to recognize that the work of such intensity as Radcliffe's clearly is invention, and to be appreciated on that level alone. But then they live much more circumscribed lives than does Henry, who already has had the benefit of a university education to broaden his knowledge and understanding of the world. Opportunities of this kind are obviously not open to Austen's heroines. Women are still very much second-class citizens with very restricted and dictated horizons. Ultimately, that is one of the key points the author is making, that it is a lack of education and experience that leads women like Catherine and Isabella to escape so enthusiastically into literature, or what Peter Knox Shaw, a renowned critic, has neatly termed some Gothic chick. Their need for an alternative reality is an indictment of the one in which they live, with its strict notions of decorum, particularly as regards women, and narrow social vision overall. It is apparent that beyond finding a suitable marriage partner, there is little that the women of Catherine's class can aspire to, no career structure for them to take advantage of, and thus exercise some degree of control over their lives. It is the sheer lack of opportunity of self expression that makes Gothic romances, with all their lurid tales and narrative twists and turns and absurdities, so appealing to young women of this class. One could argue that it is boredom more than anything else that prompts imitation of popular culture, maybe boredom with one's lack of access to modes of self expression. An observation probably as true in our own day as it was in Austen's time. The overall aim of Austen's project, clearly in Northanger Abbey, is didactic. Even it has been suggested that she overdoes the irony in somewhat overdoes the irony in achieving her objective. Be that as it may, it is clearly her intention to warn us against both an emotional overindulgence in arts and the dangers of under-educating the young, such that they fail to have a sense of proportion about art. Austen was well aware of literature's power to affect us and influence us. As an author, she could hardly have been otherwise, but she is aware well of the necessity of not allowing this to get out of hand. If we let our emotions dominate us, then we must expect there to be unpleasant circumstances. Isabella Thorpe is prone to just such behavior, as a result of which she is fast becoming a social pariah of sorts by the end of the narrative, her insincere jargon fooling no one. At one point, we find Catherine's mother delivers herself of the trite state sentiment that we must live and learn, but it holds a moral for the tale nonetheless. Catherine does live and learn. In contrast, Isabella fails to, and their respective fates are meant to convey a lesson to the reader. The newly mature Catherine becomes somewhat painfully aware of Isabella's shallowness of character and comes to regret their friendship. Catherine has managed, in other words, to distance herself from her past, and with that baleful influence of popular culture and the media, these will no longer be allowed to dominate her thoughts and influence her worldview. Northanger Abbey is clearly about the seduction of the reader, fictional and real. Since reading may control mental construction and perception, it is the comedy of fiction, enriching and deforming the life of a single girl. Samuel Johnson once claimed that in the modern romance of familiar history, as he said it, the power of example is so great as to take possession of the memory by a kind of violence and produce effects almost without the intervention of the will. These were his exact words. The external reader is caught up in the process, for he or she cannot help believing in the novel's events, even as the narrator proclaims them fictional. The mind in and outside the novel is inhabited by stories, including the stories implied by habitual language. The only defense against their control is perhaps constant questioning and constant scrutiny, not only of the works, but of the memory into which they have been transmitted. Using the vehicle of a naive heroine, Northanger Abbey studies the creation of subjectivity through language and its images. Since it is also a novel with a novel's plot, it delivers a satisfactory story in which a sophisticated hero is seduced by sparkling eyes and girlish adoration. So these are the basic points within which we need to study the novel Northanger Abbey. Thank you.